Okay, so we've assigned instruments in our Vienna ensemble. We've assigned the appropriate MIDI channels in Notion for those to play back, and we're ready to give it a listen. So this is a little better audio recording than last time. Hopefully it'll sound a little better. Here's the introduction to Robin Is to the Greenwood Gone. Okay, that sounds pretty good. I'm rather prejudiced, but one reason that I really like Notion is that I think it is very musical out of the box. I think it performs well. I've played with other notation programs over the last few years, and they just don't seem to play as well. Anyway, that's an editorial comment. You can take it or leave it. So this, as you probably realize, is a recording made without reverb, without any panning or inputs, no plugins, no additional processing of the VSL instruments. These are VSL instruments straight up. And so even in that case, it sounds pretty darn good, but we're going to make it sound better. So what we're going to do now is add some plugins, some reverb, and we're going to place it in a MIRPro soundstage. And we're going to start working with it to make it sound even better than it did. Any discussion of plugins starts with a disclaimer. I don't get paid for endorsing any specific plugin, and the ones that I'm going to show you I've selected after a couple years of experimentation. I've selected them for any number of reasons: cost, interface design, the ease of use. There's any number of reasons why I use the plugins that I do, and you'll have your own favorites, of course. So this really will simply show you how to use plugins. Another discussion that you'll have to have with yourself is, where do you apply plugins? You have a number of different places where you can plug these things in. One is within the Notion mixer itself. You can see that within the Notion mixer there are 4 plugin inserts for each channel, and you can use those to insert your plugins. In addition to that, in the VSL ensemble, there is an unlimited number of plugin slots available. So I've inserted a quick bandpass plugin here and a compressor plugin as well. One of the advantages of placing your plugins in the Vienna ensemble mixer is that you can drag and drop them in terms of their processing order in the channel. And that might be important to you. You don't have that option in the Notion mixer. Once you insert a plugin, it's in that location and it can't be moved. The order can't easily be changed. In order to do that, you have to basically delete and add to change the order of plugins once you place them. The other approach is a hybrid approach, and that's what I'm going to show you. That's the workflow that I have. So basically, I do local plugins for channels, for instruments at the Vienna ensemble level, and then I do global channel plugins for global processing, or for bus processing, or for master processing at the Notion level. That's a hybrid approach that I've developed. It seems to work for me. You can develop your own approach, of course, but that's what I'm going to show you. One common complaint since the advent of digital recording is that digital recordings sound chilly, they sound cold, there's no warmth that you get from analog processing. So the first plugin that I usually apply is at the global level, and I apply it to both the channel strip for the VSL ensemble and to the master strip, and that plugin that I use is called Britson bus. Basically, since I'm using the channel strip here as a bus to gather all of the VE ensemble channels together, I use a bus channel warmer here, and for the master bus as well. So these plugins simply are used to emulate a Britson channel board, and that basically warms up the sound and warms up the signal, applies an analog algorithm to each channel. It's very, very subtle, and if you had to listen to it straight up or without these added, you probably wouldn't notice much difference. But overall, I think it adds a bit of warmth to the sound. So that's the first plugin that I add. One thing to remember as we're working with the Notion mixer, let me just pull this out here, expand it so that it shows you all the channels. The 8 original channels in this mixer represent the original staffs that we created in the score. And so you really don't use those for anything. They don't sound, they don't do anything in this mixing environment. So if you want to get rid of those, what I typically do is come over here and I click the VSTI preset button. And that folds it down to show only the Vienna Ensemble VSTI presets that I have, as well as buses and the master channel. Because these are the only channels that are being used to create sound. The next thing I'm going to do is to set up a MIRPro soundstage environment. If you're not familiar with it, MIRPro is a processing plugin whereby you can locate instruments within a soundstage, move them around, and the resulting pan setups will be such that it emulates the physical reality and acoustics of the original reverb space for that venue. I do that typically at the Vienna Ensemble level because I want a separate MIRPro instance for each individual instrument. You can use either the inline Vienna MIRPro plugin, which creates a Vienna MIRPro instance and soundstage only within this Vienna Ensemble. And for this case, that would work fine. If you have more than one Vienna Ensemble instance, if you have, for instance, a Vienna Ensemble instance for strings, one for violins, one for violins, two, one for violas, one for cellos, one for basses, one for winds, you might have that in a large orchestral recording. And then you wouldn't want to use this inline instance. You'd want to come down here to VSL Vienna MIRPro and use that. It creates an instance outside of the Vienna Ensemble itself, and that could be more useful for large ensembles. We'll look at that later when I'm blogging about setting up recordings for large ensembles. But for now, because I have a small ensemble, 8 instruments, it's all contained easily within a single Vienna Ensemble instance, I'm going to use the inline approach. So I select Vienna MIRPro, stereo to stereo. And when you do that and click on that, it clicks you over to the Vienna MIRPro tab. Let's look at this in more detail. So we've created this MIRPro instance, and it brings up a soundstage. Right now, it's saying please select a venue because it doesn't know what soundstage you want to use. And I'm licensed for these sound stages. And for this ensemble, I'm going to use a small hall, the Sage Hall 2. So it shows you a plan view of the hall, and it shows you some images of what that hall looks like. It's a beautiful venue located in the Sage Gateshead, designed by Norman Foster and Partners. I'm an architect, so I get excited about these things. There you see the exterior of the facility. It's really a cool building. Anyway, back to music. You load that, and it changes the plan view of the venue to the actual Sage 2 hall. And when it does that, what it's doing is really very, very sophisticated. It's like turning the key in your car and the engine starts running and off you go. It's pretty invisible to you, but what it's doing under the hood is really miraculous. What this does is it recalls convolution reverbs that were made from any number of different locations within this hall. And as you move this instrument around on the sound stage, the plugin in itself is adjusting the sound output to reflect that actual location. So as you move that instrument on the sound stage, the sound that it produces within the acoustical space itself changes. So there's a connection between the physical reality of the space and the physical location of the instrument in the plugin. You'll notice when I click on that instrument, it highlights the area that's active. You can't put a flute out here and expect it to be heard. Obviously, they had to limit the number of reverberations that they sampled within this space. And so you can only place this instrument on the soundstage itself. You can't place it here in the audience. You can't place a flute player up in the gallery. It has to be within this highlighted area. So the first instrument was a flute. You'll notice that when we placed that plugin on this channel, it knows it's a flute. And in the plugin itself, it recognizes a flute instrument as a flute instrument. I mentioned that you can save and recall VE frames or projects. What I've done previously is saved a VE project for this particular recording, Robin Is to the Greenwood Gone. And so I'm going to recall that now. I'm going to load that project. I'm not going to save changes to this project, but I'm going to load a VI frame that I've saved. I've called it Robin VI frame. It's saved in a specific location that I keep on my computer. I open that, and it will load a VI frame for all those specific instruments, all the instruments within my ensemble. I've already got them located in the right place. I've adjusted the angle and the direction that I like to hear them from. I've adjusted their exact location. The fiddle is front and center. It's a solo instrument. Flute and English horn, the two winds, are pretty much front. Flute to the left, English horn to the right. The bass fiddle's on the right, in the back supporting, and the violas, middle fiddles, on the left in the back supporting, and then double bass at the very back of the stage. So I've already set this up previously, I recall it, and now it's ready to play. So there are a lot of settings that you can adjust over here in both the instrument section and the output section. You can adjust the microphone, change the microphone type. In this case, I'm using a Bloomline pair. It's a very traditional kind of simple mic setup. Two mics set at 90 degrees to each other. You can change its location, conductor to fifth row. These are the preset locations at which the convolution reverberations were sampled, but you can adjust these. You can move the mic anywhere within the room and it will interpolate between those presets. Two important things are the dry wet offset of the instrument. Each individual instrument can be adjusted here, and then the global dry wet offset of the whole room can be adjusted here. I typically pull those down a little bit. The default settings at 0 tend to be a little wet for my taste. So those are the local plugins, those MIRPro instances. There are a couple left over from the VI Pro setup. We'll look at those right now. I typically add a reverb tail using an analog reverb, and for that I like to use Valhalla Room. It's a very nice reverb system, very simple plugin, very easy to adjust, very graphic in terms of its display. Its user interface is very simple. And I've set up a wood room sweetener, which I use to basically sweeten the reverb tail, in addition to that provided by VSL MIRPro. So VSL MIRPro is a convolution reverb. That's what it is. I use Valhalla Room just to sweeten that tail and to get a little more richness in the mix. For this, I've also used a PSP mixed treble plugin, which basically is a harmonic enhancer. It enhances the highs, the trebles, and it will add harmonics at a certain frequency and level. So those are all the local plugins. And then we'll move on to the global plugins that I plug into the Notion mixer. So I use a couple other global plugins in addition to the warmth that's added by the Brits and Bus plugins. I also add a PSP AudioWare Vintage Warmer plugin. Again, this is basically just analog tube algorithmic plugin. I have a preset that I've saved called Vintage Warmer Mix Finalizer. I like to use that. And then I typically like to add a bit of compression, again using PSP AudioWare plugin, the Mix Pressor 2. I have a preset that I use called Mix Comp 1176 Small Orchestra. It emulates an analog 1176 compressor. So I'll add those two compressors. And at that point, the setup is basically ready for playback. We'll give it a listen and see how it sounds. We'll play back here from measure 19, since you're probably tired of hearing that intro. Okay, that sounded pretty good. I hope you agree. For a long time, I would get to this point and export audio from Notion to make recordings. The last 3 or 4 months, I've been adding even more life and realism to my instruments by using MIDI control channels to control various parameters within the VSL instruments themselves. So we'll look at that next time. In the meantime, take care and thanks for listening.